Welcome to New York City and Mission City Church. We're here to connect people with God and with each other. We hope you're encouraged by this week's message.
James 1, 9 through 15. Let the lowly brother boast in his exaltation, and the rich in his humiliation, because like a flower of the grass he will pass away. For the sun rises with its scorching heat and withers the grass. Its flower falls and its beauty perishes. So also will the rich man fade away in the midst of his pursuits. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it is conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death.
Thank you, and one more time, good morning, especially to our guests this morning. I know that it was a rainy Sunday morning, and it's, again, like the worst type of rain where it's not snow because it's 40 degrees, and so it's cold and wet, so really appreciate everyone making it out this morning. My name is Pat Hollinger, and I'm one of the community group leaders here, and from time to time I have the opportunity to speak, which I'm really excited to be doing this morning, and we'll be continuing our study of James this morning. And so the other day, I went into the world of artificial intelligence and AI, and specifically ChatGPT, which is like the leading brand if you've been living under a rock and don't know, and asked it to generate a series of images for me. And what I was trying to do was see, what does AI, this cumulative new technology, think about wealth and the progression of wealth and how it impacts our lives individually. And so I asked it to generate a series of images. And so the first image that I said, generate an image of a man down to his last $1,000. And so you can kind of see it up on the screen, but it's this man who's kind of looking off into the distance. He's a little bit desolate, big wrinkles on his face. The room is kind of old and sparsely furnished, and he's a little bit downtrodden, and the text at the below says, here is the image depicting a middle-aged man in a modest room down to his last $1,000. The scene captures his concern and contemplation in a sparsely furnished environment. So that was the kind of baseline level. And I said, okay, next, show him as a millionaire, so drastically increasing the scale. And so now you see what is classic AI generated, right? The wrinkles are gone. The 5 o'clock shadow is now intentional. He's very handsome, strong jawline, beautiful office, city in the background. He's got 2 $100 bills sitting on his desk, because I guess that's what you do when you're a millionaire. And the text says, here's the man in a luxurious setting capturing the essence of wealth and success. So already wealth and success are being closely tied together in this world of AI. And so now I go to the max of semi-comprehensible wealth in today's day and age and say a billionaire. So the same man as a billionaire. And so now it's like even more over the top, right? There's like gold everywhere. For some reason on the bottom right, he has 8 different watches that are all watch face forward. The art that you can see on the far sides, there's like massive 30-foot pieces of art, and the man is a little bit more serious, because when you're a billionaire, you become more serious. And again, it says luxurious and opulent environment embodying the pinnacle of wealth and power. And so now power and wealth are being tied you're at the pinnacle, the very, very top of the modern era. And you can see how as the net worth increases, wealth is clearly having an impact on people's environment, as we know. And in the text that accompanies it is they're saying there's power and other things associated with this. And so then I do one final image, which in the modern word, I would say priceless is even higher than a billionaire. Someone whose life is priceless would be, you could say that their life is even better than a billionaire. And it said, so show me an image of a man whose life is priceless. And now you can see this very sparsely cluttered room, a very, very contemplative looking man. And it says that his life is considered priceless, not because of material wealth, but due to his profound impact and contributions to humanity. The setting is modest and serene, reflecting his wisdom and kindness, and he's sitting cross-legged and pensive. And And here's the like amazing weakness and amazing strength of AI, right? Like the weakness first is clearly not every person who has $1,000 or a millionaire or a billionaire or whose life is priceless looks like the images that were generated, right? Every person that has one of those things could come from different cultures or different backgrounds, different races, and they're not going to look exactly like the people that we saw looked. But the amazing strength, I would say, is that it's onto something in that it knows that a truly rich life does not necessarily have to do with wealth, because it made this clear pivot once you got to the level of priceless, right? It was the ladder that you were climbing once you got to the priceless level all of a sudden moved away, and even AI was able to make that deduction. And I think the reason it is because AI is like this cumulative understanding of all of our deep down understandings. And so I think deep down, we all probably know that. And so this morning we're going to be talking about living a truly rich life and what that means. And chances are, I think every person has spent some amount of time thinking about what living a truly rich life means, or saying out loud, what would enrich me? You may have never actually said it, but you definitely are living your life, and you can tell that this is important to you because you follow your actions, and your actions demonstrate what you think is rich. And for some people, it might be the financial direction that we just talked about. It's like, I need to make more money because that will be what enriches me. Some people, it's experiences or the freedom to make any decision that you want. Sometimes it's a person that I really want to enrich me. But you say, what would make my life better? And the problem is that we have a tendency to get it wrong. And I know that we get it wrong because for most people, like the what would enrich me thing has changed multiple times over the course of your life. So how can it be permanent and correct if you change multiple times? And so we tend to miss. And so to help us answer the question of what living a truly rich life entails, we're going to go back to the study of James, which we've been in. And James, for context, is a book that's written in the New Testament. And so after the birth and death and resurrection of Jesus. And James is actually Jesus' brother. So he's as close as one can get to Jesus. And his book, if you're not familiar with it, I personally really like, because it's not like deep philosophical, what does this mean? It's like extremely blunt, black and white, action-oriented, here's right, here's wrong, which is especially helpful in the fast-paced New York City environment that we live in. And I see, just to preview, like two main points in this text, which are seemingly unrelated, but I'll preview them to you now. And the first point is that a rich life is one of humility, not wealth. And the second point is that a rich life catches temptation early before sin can even begin. And if you didn't write those down, if you're a note taker, it's okay, because I'll come back to them in great detail. But just want to give you the direction before we step in here. And so let's get started. So the text starts off, let the lowly brother boast in his exaltation, and the rich in his humiliation, because like a flower of the grass he will pass away, for the sun rises with its scorching heat and withers the grass, its flower falls and its beauty perishes. So also will the rich man fade away in the midst of his pursuits. And so if we just go back one slide, Landry, you can see the beginning where it's the lowly brother boasts in his exaltation, and to be exalted means to be brought up, and the rich in his humiliation, which means to be brought down, right? And so he's comparing and contrasting. And when you brought into an eternal Christian perspective, one thing is going to happen. If someone is lowly in circumstance in the earthly environment, they're going to be infinitely brought up whenever they get to heaven, because they're intimately or infinitively going to be with Jesus, right? And so for a rich person, though, there's the saying that everyone knows, right? You came into this world with nothing, and you'll leave this world with nothing. So there's going to be a lessening of accounts. And so neither earthly wealth nor earthly poverty are going to go with you into the next life. And so regardless of whether you're rich or poor, life on earth is temporary and life in heaven is eternal, right? And so you shouldn't spend every waking moment thinking about wealth and how can I get more. And so the first point that we're going into is a rich life is one of humility and not of wealth. And so I'm going to compare and contrast and focus on the two groups of people that the text mentions. And so if we focus on the poor brother or person, the lowly in circumstance, like life on earth can feel dire, like wealth is not abundant. The modern Western age in one way or another has probably told you that you've failed. But the humble perspective of the Christian is that you've infinitely experienced success because of your relationship with Jesus. And when you back up to the eternal perspective, you have unbelievable success. And when the world strips away financial possession, you actually have the ability to focus even more of your time on that relationship with Jesus and on what that goodness looks like. And you have no distraction. Like there are so many verses in the Bible about riches and the impact that it can have in a negative perspective. Like choosing one is the common one where it's easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than a rich person is to get to heaven. And part of that is because you have so many distractions. You're constantly on the pursuit of more and more and more, and what am I going to do? And you have all of these temptations around you. And like when you don't have all of those things, all of the distractions are taken away, and you just are left with the ability to focus on Jesus, which is something that should be boasted about. And if we turn to the rich brother, James says he should boast in his humiliation, like he should be proud about the fact that he's being humiliated and brought down. He should be boast in the fact that he's being humbled. The man chasing all of the wealth, like the rest of the verses, he will fade away like the grass or like a flower. His beauty will perish. And I think the especially impactful part is he will perish and pass away in the midst of his pursuits. And so he literally will be pursuing the thing, because whenever you're chasing wealth, you are constantly pursuing it and you never arrive. It's not, and then he will arrive and then he will pass away. It's on his pursuit that he's going to fade away, because when you're chasing wealth, it can never be enough. And a rich life is one of the humility to know that that is the case. And one author says that humility is the ability to see the reality as it is, so the reality of the situation. And it is the proper mindset for the believer, whether wealthy or poor. And so as you hear these words describing like this wealth spectrum and the proper approach to it, like I encourage you to take a proper reality check of where you are on this topic, like internally and with your actions. And how much time is this occupying your mind or your heart? How much time do you think about material riches and how much you want them and how much it will impact your situation? Are you constantly comparing yourself to other people, which in New York City is so easy to do? Can you be content with the lot in life that God has given you, knowing that you can't take that material possession with you into eternity? And I have seen personally both ends of this spectrum of riches and wealth, like more than I think probably the average person has. And I've seen the person lowly in circumstance be infinitely exalted and infinitely joyful, and how that impacts their heart. And I personally have seen and felt like the sting that is the path of just chasing wealth incessantly for your entire life. And so I'll tell you about both of those experiences to draw out what it can look like. And so first, the people who are obeying this verse. I've had the chance over 5 different trips to spend almost 3 or 4 months in Zambia, which is a country in Africa. It's one of the countries with the highest orphan populations in the world. And in doing that ministry work, working with some of the kids, I've had the opportunity to work with the local Zambian folks who are on the ground volunteering in partnership with the Americans to help these kids that they're working with. And in many instances, I've had the chances to interact with these local volunteers, and by the statutes of the Western world and New York City world, guaranteed they are considered poor on the spectrum of wealth in the environments that they are living in. And also guaranteed, like, the people in my life that I have seen worship God and live an exalted life in relationship with Jesus day in and day out, better than anyone are these people. You will get together in a group about this size and worship, and there's no instruments and mics, and it's the most beautiful, passionate singing that you've ever seen. You have a conversation and someone says, "How are you doing?" And I say, "I'm doing well," or "I'm doing fine, I'm doing good. How are you doing?" And they respond with "blessed." And then they're saying blessed because of their relationship that they have with God. And that's what is so defining for them. And I think is the example of what living out this verse is, and can be so contrary to the Western world that we live in, and how we live. Their entire life is Jesus. And when you strip away all of the distractions that we are constantly surrounding ourselves with, especially the climbing the wealth ladder part, it's so much easier to focus on Jesus. And now I'll take you into the other part of that spectrum, into my own personal life, and this is like a shameful part of my life, and into my daily work environment. And so outside these walls in the city, what I do is I work in finance, and specifically in wealth management. And so if you don't know what that is, it's managing wealth. When people have excess wealth, they hire people to manage it. And so you like walk around, it's a foreign concept for most. And when you walk around my office, like that's what everyone is doing all day. And so like people don't have the coffee mug with James 1:9 on it, because it would be pretty hard to get new clients if you're saying that you're going to pass away in pursuit of this wealth, right? And so a couple of years ago, like the way that our industry works is like around December, they call you in and they give you your year-end review, and they give you a bonus based off of how you did that year. And so going into my year-end review, Maggie and I had been talking about, my wife and I had been talking about, okay, like what's the bonus number that would make us feel like overly blessed, overly happy, overly reflective of the year we had? Like, let's be open-handed and feel blessed with this number that it is, right? And so we decide on what that number is. Earlier that day, I'm going in, and I have a good friend who's a year younger than me. And whether he should or not, he tells me his number. Hey, I just got my number. Here's what it is. And it was the exact number that Maggie and I had just talked about, and he was a year younger. And so naturally, what I did in that moment was say, oh, well, if he got that, then I should be getting even more. He's a year younger than me, right? And so immediately, just like that, flipped my mindset on the topic. And so I go in and I have my year in review, and I get my number, and lo and behold, it's the exact number that we and I had talked about, and it was the exact number that my buddy who's a year younger had gotten. And immediately in that moment, I said, "Thank you, God, I'm so blessed." No, I didn't. I said, I was furious. Like I was like physically upset and had like my blood boiling, because I was like, no, that's not fair. I'm a year older than him. I'm a year more experienced. I had a year's worth more of contributions. How could I possibly get the same number as this person? And thankfully, Maggie like swiftly later that night like brought me back down to reality, which is what I needed. And it's like you're talking about like a bonus figure here. Like most people, that's not even a word that you come to expect at the end of the year. This is not something that you needed. This is something that you wanted. How could you be so selfish? How could you be so greedy? Which is like the level, by the way, if you need like firmness, like that is what firmness, but appropriate firmness looks like when someone like is clearly losing their mind. And like we just said that this would be amazing news. And I give you that story to like that's how quickly it can just like flip, and it's so easy to just step into the here's what we would be really happy with to more. And that's how fast you can fall into that. And so like there are the two options, right? Like it might not be Zambia, and it might not be in a financial advisor's office, but you do get to choose which path you will be on and what your approach will be. If you choose to obey and fully detach your richness in life from material wealth and riches, your life looks so much more enriching. If you choose to disobey, like your life is the constant chase and the constant pursuit. And so the call to action is to not focus on wealth. It's to focus on humility and where you will be eternally. And it's hard to remember, and it's very easy to slip into this being all-consuming. And you won't be able to bring it with you, which I think I've emphasized. And the last thing I just re-emphasize is, like, the verse is extremely short on the lowly brother, and it's extremely long on the person who's pursuing their riches. Like, you'll fade away, you'll be on the midst of your pursuit, you'll never get there, and it will be exhausting. And so I can try and emphasize it as much as I can, but it's the reality that you want to go try out and say, oh, well, maybe I'll figure it out when I get there. Like, don't spend your time. And so James is going to shift now And we're going to shift into the inner management of yourself. So living a rich life, we now know is not tied to material wealth, and is going to be very tied to inner management of self, right? If you can't manage yourself internally, how can you hope to have like this rich life that we want, right? And so the verses continue. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to him. Here he's probably talking about the lowly brother, continue to stay steadfast under trial. And he continues, let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it is conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, gives birth to death. And I love this scripture going back to James being like very black and white. This is how it happens. First, we hear that God is not tempting you and God didn't make you do it. I've heard variations of those words in Christian circles, and you now have the scripture to back it up, where it's like, God is not the one tempting you, and God is not like, I'm going to put you into this situation and see how you do. He's not the one who's tempting you, and he's incapable of it. The human heart and sin is what causes you to get tempted. And then the progression, right, is so clear. First, you have desire. And when desire is fully conceived, it gives birth to sin. And so fully conceived in desire, what does that mean? It's like in your head, you have the thing and you're like, I think I'm going to do the thing, and then you do the thing. That would be desire being fully conceived, and now you're at the sin stage. And then sin can start off small. When it's fully grown, gives forth to death, experientially or literally. In death in dark places, the fully played out version of this feels to me like the direct opposite of what living a beautiful, rich life looks like. And so a rich life catches temptation early and stops sin before it can begin, which is the second point here. Because by the time you're at the sin stage, like desire has gone unchecked, and you've gone into what you were in your mind thinking about doing. And you're obviously free to make your own choices, but like the choices have consequences, right? If you jump in a pool, you're going to get wet. If you act on the desire, the consequence is going to happen. And if you're hearing this, like I heard this great metaphor that translates to the temptation being staged, and like where does temptation fall into this from a sin spectrum versus the sin part of it. And the metaphor says, you can't control when a bird flies over your head, right? Like happens all the time. You can control if a bird makes a nest in your hair. And so again, you can't control if it flies overhead. I would say that's temptation. You can control if it makes a nest in your hair. That's like dwelling on it all day and then acting upon it. And to bring life to that, right? Like thinking about summertime in New York City, less the current weather, but like we've all walked on the streets of New York and seen someone we find unbelievably attractive run or walk by us, probably not wearing a lot of clothes if it's summer. And you can't control that. I'm fine saying you can't control that. That's the city we've all chose to live in. You can control if you do the double take, right? Or you are sitting on the subway and like you reorient yourself to look at the person who you find attractive for the rest of the 5-minute subway ride. You can control that portion. And you can control if you then dwell on that person for the rest of the day and they occupy your thoughts for the rest of that day and you continuously think about it. You can control if later that night you're continuously dwelling and then you're thinking about how you haven't been intimate with someone and you text an old hookup or throw on pornography or go to a party. Like those are all of the parts that you can control, but that is the progression, right? Like you start off with someone walks by you, it then turns into like you do the look and then it goes into, okay, I'm gonna think about this all day. And like that is the scale, right? Like temptation, then desire fully birthed or conceived goes into sin, and you have to stop it at the temptation stage at the beginning. Like you can't hope that like when you text the person to come over that they're gonna say no. Like you have to stop it very early. And that's why it's saying it catches temptation early and stops sin before it can begin. And one of the most spiritually in tune and blessed people in the entire Bible is King David. And King David's like downfall from grace, which I'll capture for you, like epitomizes this. And to build him up for a second, like he writes all of Psalms. He's so in touch with God. God blesses him, brings him from a very lowly position, defeats Goliath, makes him the king of the entire nation, right? And later in life, he's king, and one day he's walking on the top of his roof of the castle, right? He looks down and he sees a young woman who's bathing. And as one does, and he does the double take, right? He takes it even a step further. He asks people around him, like, who is that? So already he's gone past I shouldn't have seen that, and I'm going to keep walking. He's like, oh, I saw that. Who is that? He asks the people around him, and people give him a little bit of a reality check. Isn't that Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah? So not only, yes, that's the person, that person's married, and I think you know the husband. So pretty good stop sign that he just blows right by, right? And he says, great, bring her to me. They then sleep together. She gives birth to a son. He then has Uriah, the person he knows, killed at war, and then the baby dies, and the kind of end of David's reign begins to unravel from there, right? And like David did not get out of bed that morning and say, I'm going to get a girl pregnant, kill her husband, and then have the rest of my downfall begin, right? Like this is the nature of sin. It doesn't just happen like instantly. And it's the subway example. It's the person walking on the street example. Like I am confident that he sees her and says, nope, and keeps going. Like the rest of the story doesn't have to happen, and it does happen that instantly at the very beginning stage. And I exhort you on this because you can't compromise an inch. You can't follow this temptation. Like in this example, it leads to literal death in multiple ways, and that's how the James verse ends, right? It's sin once fully grown leads forth to death. And in this example, it's literal death. It can be experiential death. And I know the immediate pushback on hearing this is like, it's not really going to affect me. Like death is a bit dramatic. And the answer is yes, it's dramatic, but yes, experiential death can really happen. And I'll give you a few examples here. Like one is you constantly sacrifice your integrity in the name of people pleasing. You want other people to like you, and so you kind of change a little bit on the margin, things about yourself that you would have said, like, that's a real huge part of me that I'm no longer going to stand up for. And like that naturally extends into like constant anxiety because you're internally divided of like, who actually am I, or am I this person that's trying to please other people? And like the answer is go back to the beginning and like don't compromise, and then surround yourself with people who like love you for who you actually are, right? Like a one-time hookup that's like, oh, it's not a big deal, like what could this possibly really do, is like, that's like a memory etched into your mind forever, that like you're trying to be intimate with your spouse one day and like the image pops into your mind whenever, you know, your spouse, you know, upset you that day. Like that's the reality. And you might compare yourselves incessantly to others and never be pleased with how you look. And like perhaps that is being fueled by hours and hours and hours on Instagram or TikTok. And like the millennial fix here is like set the timer app on your phone, limit the amount of minutes, and like set it to 10 minutes, and don't do the version where you can just like click past it. Like give the password to somebody else, and so you can't spend hours and hours and hours all day on these apps. And like you might try an experience with a drug that quite literally could give you experiential death the next day, and the rest of time you are thinking about like, oh my gosh, that one night that I did that, maybe I want to go try that again, and that temptation is now going to be lodged in your head for forever. In denial of saying it's a big deal or that it's not a big deal, rather is the pathway. And I'm not like up here just trying to tell you, like, just say no to the thing. I'm trying to get you to think about what the end is. And so you have to start at the very beginning and not do the double take, right? And it's not meant to be scaring mentality, but it can't be overstated of like, this is where it ends at the end. And again, in my own life, like, I experienced this firsthand on my own journey. And I grew up in a very Christian home, went to church, and would have claimed that I'm a Christian from like walking age up until high school. And the moment I went to college, I was like, all of these parts of my life that I've said no and I'm never going to do, I'm going to go try all of them, essentially. And like, I left this terrible trail in my wake. And I graduate college, and I'm living in Houston at the time, with a really good friend and a very stable guy that is my roommate. And about a year in, one of my other friends from high school asks if he can stay with us for 4 weeks. I say, yeah, that's no problem. And a couple of weeks in, he starts smoking weed in the backyard, and kind of no big deal from my perspective. But my roommate was kind of like, hey, he's smoking every day. Like the steady state roommate was like, he's smoking every day. Should we say something? And I was like, no, it's fine. Let him do his thing. Conflict averse. Like, we're good. And in my head, it was because I was like, I'm going to go join him here in a second. And like, I did, and it was so easy. Like, what was the rationalization? What was the denial? What was this isn't going to happen to me? He's only staying here for 4 weeks. He's going to move out. It's no problem. I'll do this a few times, get my experience, and then he's going to move out. And fast forward the story, right? My original roommate and I had lived together for 2 years. He goes off to medical school. Who happens to need a roommate? The guy who had been staying with us, who's the pot smoker, right? And now what do you think happens? Like, I was like, oh, the 4 weeks were good, and now I'm never going to smoke weed again. No, I started like multiple times a week, constantly. I start lying to a girl that I'm dating about doing this. I then move to New York City, and like, if you're in your first 6 months or have been here longer, like the first 6 months here are really tough because you don't know a bunch of people. It can feel super lonely. Like, the city is very fast paced. It's pouring rain. It's 40 degrees outside, and you're from Texas. And now I'm like having a conversation with someone. It's like, oh, you can just like literally text a phone number and someone will deliver weed to your front door. And I was thrust into that. And what did I start doing now? I started smoking weed every single day to fall asleep, to combat the realities of like moving to this new city and what that looks like. I'm now completely and totally lying to the girl that I'm dating. She'll come visit, and I'll do it behind her back while she's in the apartment. And like, that's the far right of the spectrum. And it starts at the very, very beginning, when like my original roommate's like, hey, he's smoking in the backyard every day. Like, do you want to say something? And like, the answer is you say yes, like at the very, very, very beginning. And like, you may hear that story and think about your own situation and say like, I have the self-control, like that's not going to be me. And maybe you do, but like, maybe you don't. And like, for me, like, if there's a 0.5% chance that like that's going to be the ending outcome, where I'm smoking weed every day, lying to the person, and like can't face myself and look myself in the mirror anymore, like, it's not worth the risk. And like, the nature of sin is that it takes you further than you ever intended to go. And I want to live this truly rich life, and the rich life catches temptation early and stops sin before it can even begin. And you can see the kindness of God here, right? Like, the knock on Christianity from non-Christians is like, you have to live in this box that there's so many rules. And the reality is, like, when you live in the box, it is the most freeing thing that can possibly exist, right? You live out completely in the open. You have no secrets. You have no lies between your friends. You have people that love you and that pour into you and that want to help you. Like, it's the truly rich life. And the reality is, like, to close this, is it's too late for us to avoid temptation, and we've already said yes in our hearts and in our actions time and time and time again. And we've all brought either experiential or literal death to ourselves or those around us, whether in small scale or large scale, it doesn't matter. We've all sinned, right? And this is where our need for a substitute comes in. And there's exactly one person who never followed that trail from temptation to desire to sin to death. And there's one person who lived the human experience and never compromised an inch and never gave in to sin. And that person is Jesus, right? And he got on the cross having lived this perfect life, and he said to God, give me all of their sin, all of their love of money and pursuit of wealth, all of their not catching temptation early and fully playing out the sin story. I will take all of that, let them have the perfect life that I've lived so that they can have eternal life with you. Give them that and I'll gladly make that substitute. And that's what the Christian experience is. It's, I'm going to go follow that person because he did that for me. And he conquered death and rose 3 days later so that we all can have the experience that we do now. And regardless of where you are in the room, you might be hearing this experience or this story and say, like, I get it. I know I'm living that. I know that message that you just said about Jesus, but I'm living the life. And like, how do I bridge that gap? And the way to bridge the gap is like, go start living your life out in the open. Like, go get plugged in. It can be here. It can be somewhere else, like with other Christian people where you can be utterly honest and people are going to love you regardless. Like, that's what community is. And if you hear all of that and you're like, this is the first time I'm hearing it, like, same thing, like, come find someone around you. Maybe you're here by yourself. Like, we'll be down here at the end. Like, tell someone you want to go experience this life that we're talking about, because it truly is what living a rich life looks like. And we'll go ahead and pray now. Dear Lord, thank you for the reality that your love and that your grace for us just never ceases, regardless of how far down the sin rabbit hole we may have gone or how high we've tried to climb on the wealth ladder and spent so much time focusing on it. There is no way that your everlasting love can change. You chase after us and you find us in our most dark and desolate places, and we just thank you for that, and thank you that we do get to live in a world where there's community and there's other people around who want to love us and who want to live life in the open following you. I just pray for every person in this room to just take that reality check, live their life with eyes wide open of where they currently are, and take an honest mark to market of how that looks, and let them just be open to the reality that living life the way that you tell us to is actually the most freeing and enriching thing that can exist. Let every person chase after that and take whatever part of their life they're holding on to the tightest and just let it go so they can follow after you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Thanks for being with us. If these messages are strengthening you in your faith, we want to hear from you. Find us online at missioncity.nyc or email us at info@missioncity.nyc so we can celebrate everything God's doing in your life. We'll see you next week.